The Cybercrime and Business Podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact to their business, and proactively address threats head on. Hey everybody out there, today is Friday, September 4th, 2015. I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I'm here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. This week's interview is with Greg Enriquez. He's the CEO of TrapX, and Gartner recently put out a report on the growing market of deception technologies. I'm looking forward to chatting with him because I really don't know much about these deception technologies, and we're going to chat about this new field and how enterprises are using these methods and tools in order to help fend off attackers. That'll be coming up in just a little bit, but first I'm going to throw it over to you, Matt, for the top cyber headlines from this week's Surfwatch Labs data.
Coming in at number 3 this week, top trending industry targets, we had the Utah Food Bank. Donors to the Utah Food Bank may have had their personal and payment card information compromised after the website for the food bank was breached. The Utah Food Bank website was breached somewhere between October 8th, 2013 and July 16th, 2015. They're not 100% sure about the actual time they were breached. And donors who made any type of donations during this time frame, they're the ones that are potentially affected. 10,385 donors are believed to be the ones affected by the breach. Compromised information included names, addresses, email addresses, and payment card information. Coming in at number 2, we have Michigan Catholic Conference. Employees for the Michigan Catholic Conference, which is a Catholic agency in Lansing, Michigan, and they handle payroll and benefits for employees from across the state. They were being notified that their personal information may have been compromised after the website for the conference suffered a data breach. The data breach was discovered in July of 2015. About 10,000 employees were also affected in this breach. Work sites affected by the breach, because this is kind of a bigger organization, included churches, schools, hospitals, orphanages, and diocese offices from around the state. The information included in this breach included names, addresses, social security numbers, birth dates, and salary information on the employees. Coming in at number 1, we have the National Crime Agency. A distributed denial of service, or DDoS attack, was launched against Britain's National Crime Agency by members of Lizard Squad. The attack appears to be in revenge for the arrest of 6 teenagers who used Lizard Squad's DDoS tool, Lizard Stressor. Just to kind of recap, the National Crime Agency has been making news all week. The NCA arrested 6 teenagers for utilizing Lizard Stressor in part of the operation codenamed Vivarium. A DDoS attack took place Tuesday morning against the NCA website. Currently, the website's back up and running. Lizard Squad posted a message Tuesday morning on Twitter, so clearly they're claiming credit for the attack. Those are the top trending industry targets for the week.
This week was pretty interesting on the social engineering front. One of the big stories that I think we're going to talk about today is this FBI warning of business email compromise that they put out, I think, about a week ago today. But Matt and I, we both were targeted with the spear phishing email. Is that the first big spear phishing email that you've seen, Matt?
From my business email, yeah. From my Surfwatch Labs account, definitely. I think a lot of people get certain types of emails. A lot of them go into their spam. You can discern and say, yeah, this is clearly a bogus email. The email that Jeff and I were targeted with appeared very legitimate. One of the big things that stood out was it wanted you to click something right away. And so that raised a red flag. But yeah, it was pretty impressive. It was a pretty legitimate looking email. Didn't we actually do some research on that and found that the person that it was supposedly from is a real person from a real corporation? Or
yeah, that's what surprised me because, obviously being in the news media, if you want to call it that, and interacting with a lot of these PR agencies, we're kind of in a position where you get a lot of emails. So the first thing I did, obviously, I checked, to see who the person was, and it was a legitimate agency, a legitimate person, legitimate number. The attachment was a valid Google Doc about annuities, but in opening it, it tried to get you to enter your credentials, which it would then steal. That was interesting. I think that happened at the exact same time we're talking about this FBI warning that's come out on these business email compromises. They describe them as a sophisticated scam targeting businesses working with foreign suppliers and or businesses that regularly perform wire transfers. According to the FBI, these BEC scams continue to grow, and they've showed an increase of 270% in identified victims and exposed loss since the beginning of the year in January 2015. So yeah, it seems like it's a pretty widespread problem. I don't know if anything stands out to you about that alert, Matt?
Yeah, I'm going to run through some stats that were actually given from the Internet Crime Complaint Center. And this, the time period for these stats is October 2013 and August 2015 concerning business email compromise. There were 7,066 total U.S. victims, and they saw over $740 million in total exposed dollars loss. And then concerning non-U.S. victims, there were 1,113, and they had over $50 million in total exposed dollars loss.
Just to clarify, I thought that was kind of confusing when I read it, just because they talk about this exposed dollar loss. I think that just includes like attacks that were thwarted and stuff as well, so money that was potentially exposed. So it's kind of slightly inflated in that regard. We've had a lot of people on the podcast throughout the year come on and say similar things about how these corporate email accounts are being targeted and a lot of these wire fraud stuff. And while we were on our break in early August from the podcast, this company Ubiquity, which is a networking company, technology company, they filed a financial document. And within that financial document, they detailed this scam that resulted in $46.7 million in funds being transferred. So it's a pretty significant story that we didn't get a chance to cover. But it ties into this because they said that what happened was that an employee was impersonated, and then the fraudulent transfers were made to overseas accounts. They recovered $8.1 million, and an additional $6.8 million are reasonably expected to be recovered. But that still leaves $31.8 million lost in this attack. And they said that they may not obtain any insurance coverage for that loss. So Ubiquity is looking at nearly a $32 million potential loss here, in direct loss, financial loss, for this attack, which sounds like a classic business email compromise. An employee was impersonated. Who knows the details of what happened, but it could have been that with an email account being compromised, someone posed these fraudulent charges to these overseas accounts, and that's kind of the classic example of what's happening. And we're seeing that a lot in the Surfwatch Labs data, as well as a lot of these people that we interview both for the podcast and people we talk to off the podcast as well.
Now, when we're talking about this, obviously when we bring things like this up, it sounds horrible, so how do you prevent it? One of the things that the FBI recommended is that businesses implement two-factor authentication for email, as well as phone verification for substantial wire transfers. We've talked about that scenario in the past too, where people through social engineering and phishing scams are able to convince employees of an organization to wire substantial sums to other banks because they believe that they were being ordered to from their boss or another member of the organization. So something to think about. Now, Jeff, speaking of that also, you did an interview with John Kuhn on a previous podcast where you guys, I thought, talked about the Dire Wolf campaign. And Kuhn said something about some sophisticated scams are even circumventing those authentication methods. So when we're going back talking about like two-factor authentication, am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, if I remember right, I think it was earlier this year, maybe like April or so. John Kuhn, he's from IBM. We chatted with him about this Dire Wolf campaign, which we've talked about a few times. But this Dire Wolf campaign kind of ties into this whole theme we're talking about, where a lot of these corporate accounts are being targeted. But the Dire Wolf campaign was actually, the big news and all the headlines that were going on at the time was they're actually able to bypass two-factor authentication. And, they didn't really bypass it, but, they social engineered people and tricked them into giving them two-factor authentication codes. So a lot of times, obviously, if you're going to transfer $1 million, you want to have something other than a username or password, so a lot of times you'll need a code, an authorization code from the bank or something. But what they did was they would infect these computers, and then they would, I believe, When you log into the bank website, you get something, hey, there's an error, you need to call this number for whatever bank. And then you call the bank, you think you're talking to your bank, you do your wire transfer, they ask you for the code, and you're actually giving the code to the cyber criminal. So that was their way around this two-factor authentication. Just because you have two-factor doesn't mean, we're definitely safe from these attacks. But obviously, it's a good recommendation from the FBI.
So that was one of the main advisories as we saw this week from the FBI. However, looking at Surfwatch Labs data and reading up on some of the news from the week, there were several other alerts and advisories. Jeff, would you mind kind of recapping some of those?
Yeah, me and Matt were going through the data this morning and checking out some of the top advisories that were showing up in Surfwatch Labs data. I think the big one was, besides the FBI one, of course, was this Key Raider. This is this new malware that's been found targeting iOS devices. The malware has successfully stolen more than 225,000 valid Apple accounts, as well as thousands of certificates, private keys, and purchasing receipts. As always, this malware is targeting jailbroken iOS devices. So that's a thing that everyone should keep in mind. Don't jailbreak your device.
Yeah, just leave your device alone, and you'll be fine. That's what because we do see a lot of that.
Yeah,
so.
If you want to get free stuff and you want to go outside of the walled garden or the Google Play Store, once you get out in the wild, you're gonna get a lot of those criminals out there as well. A couple other advisories and quick run through. There's this CoreBot malware. Researchers from IBM discovered this. CoreBot is capable of stealing passwords that are saved locally by web browsers, but IBM says the malware is, quote, unable to intercept data in real time from such applications. The malware also targets FTP clients, email clients, cryptocurrency wallets, private certificates, and data from multiple desktop apps. On the banking side, we had the Shifu, if I'm saying it right, the Shifu banking Trojan. It's actually the Japanese word for thief. Currently, it's targeting 14 Japanese banks, as well as select electronic banking platforms used in Europe. The malware has been active since around April. Another big story, back in the news, these Belkin router zero-day flaws. Security firms are warning that the popular Belkin router has multiple vulnerabilities that currently do not have a fix. It seems like every week, every month in our data, we're seeing more of these router vulnerabilities. So it's a good thing to keep up on and check out if the router that you're using is vulnerable and if you need to update it or if an update is available. And then finally, we have ransomware as a service. This first came into the news, I think it was back in May. There was this Tox ransomware that was discovered. But now Sensi researchers have discovered this new ransomware as a service product on the dark web, ORX Locker. And the interesting thing about this is that the service is completely free, so anyone can go out, they can use it, they can distribute it. And so those with no upfront cash or with limited knowledge can go ahead and try to infect people. They get the free tool, and then the people behind this ransomware as a service get a cut of every infection and every person that pays. So those were a few of the major alerts and advisories that were trending this week. Moving on to the legal side of things, there was quite a few big legal stories this week as well, right?
And one that I want to kick off with is a story I was reading from the Washington Post. It has been covered from a lot of other news publications, but this story is talking about possible sanctions imposed on China, or I should say Chinese companies and individuals, if they were somehow to benefit from the Chinese government's cyber theft of valuable U.S. trade secrets. This is something that's being discussed. Obviously, Jeff and I, we've been doing this podcast for a decent little amount of time now. We talk about foreign actors and state-sponsored actors, and China comes up quite a bit. We don't 100% know what these sanctions would all entail, but reports suggest that these sanctions could be put in place in as early as 2 weeks. If the sanctions are put in place, it would be the first time that Barack Obama would make use of an order that he signed himself back in April, which gave the president authority to, quote, freeze financial and property assets of and bar commercial transactions with individuals and entities overseas who engage in destructive attacks or commercial espionage in cyberspace. The proposed sanctions against Chinese companies and individuals would only be put into place if they fell under one of these listed harms. So the 4 harms include attacking critical infrastructure, something like a power grid, disrupting major computer networks, stealing intellectual property and benefiting from stolen intellectual property, which is actually one of the main things that's being discussed right now. And that's what's happening with a lot of these businesses and individuals. They are benefiting from this stolen intellectual property, even if they weren't the ones that stole the intellectual property.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I'm always sort of fascinated by this U.S.-China relationship, and the Chinese president is actually scheduled to visit the White House later in September. So there's been a little bit of discussion about, should the Chinese president be invited? Should Obama cancel that? Matt, our own governor, who's running for president, Scott Walker, he's been criticizing Obama, saying that he should focus on holding China accountable over its increasing attempts to undermine U.S. interests and cancel the visit. So I think we're going to get a lot of coverage on this and a lot of discussions, especially if sanctions do come through in the next couple of weeks, on or around the time of this visit, because like the Washington Post said, it would be an unprecedented step. A lot of these quotes are always anonymous sources because, they're talking about stuff that hasn't happened yet. But one administration official said that these sanctions would send a signal to Beijing that the administration is going to start fighting back on economic espionage. And it sends a signal to the private sector that we're on your team. It tells China enough is enough. So it's a lot of talk and a lot of stuff that could happen, but it's definitely interesting to see if something can be done to stop this economic espionage that everyone's been talking about for so many years.
Yeah, and when you're talking about Chinese and American, our relationship, it can be pretty rocky at times, but at the same time, we are dependent on China for a lot of things. Jeffrey A. Bader, who was a former principal advisor for Barack Obama on Asia from 2009 and 2011, said about the proposed sanctions, quote, "I'd say the chances of Chinese retaliations are high, but if a Chinese company was a beneficiary of stolen intellectual property from an American company, and the evidence is clear-cut, then actions or sanctions against that Chinese company strike me as appropriate." So that's someone from the Obama administration, former member of the Obama administration who dealt with Asia for a long time.
Yeah, so that was probably the biggest legal story or potential legal story that we got coming up, but there was a few others that popped up in the data as well. One of the ones that a lot of people were talking about was this U.S. federal agent that admitted to stealing $800,000 in Bitcoin.
This agent was a part of the Silk Road investigation, and it just kind of shows you how corrupt and kind of really evil this Silk Road was. The member's name was Sean Bridges, and he admitted to money laundering and obstruction of justice when he appeared in the San Francisco federal court. Bridges' sentencing hearing is scheduled for December. To add to that, Bridges, he isn't the only former member of the federal task force to admit to wrongdoing during this Silk Road investigation. Carl Force, who is a former U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration agent, also admitted to extortion, money laundering, and obstruction of justice.
That was a pretty big story. Real quick, I'll just run through a couple other legal stories that might interest our listeners. A settlement has been reached in the lawsuit between Sony Pictures Entertainment and former employees of the company who are trying to get class action status on the lawsuit. Their personal information was stolen in the now infamous Sony Pictures breach of 2014. The plaintiffs have until October 19th to approve the proposed settlement, but details on that settlement have not been made public at this time. And then one other legal story was Cancer Care Group has agreed to settle with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and Office for Civil Rights for violating HIPAA rules. The settlement is $750,000, and this stems from August 2012 event where a laptop was stolen from Cancer Care that contained unencrypted data on about 55,000 patients. The Office of Civil Rights' subsequent investigation after that event found that prior to the breach, Cancer Care was in widespread noncompliance with HIPAA. And as a result of the settlement, they also have to adopt a robust corrective action plan to correct deficiencies in its HIPAA compliance program. So like I said, $750,000 is a pretty significant HIPAA violation settlement. Now, cyber news can get quite serious, so this week we're kicking off a new segment. Cue the music, Matt. It's time for Dumb Story of the Week.
This week, we came across a story. We have a man that was arrested following some Facebook video posts. The man's name is Stephen Ruth. He found himself in some hot water with law enforcement after he posted 2 videos on Facebook demonstrating how to unleash a denial of service attack on traffic cameras. Now, this isn't your typical DDoS attack or your traditional cyber denial of service attack. Oh no. The method used by Ruth required, quote, a long pole and a couple balls. Ruth would use these tools to knock the traffic camera off its intended viewing area and point it at the sky, which rendered the camera useless. The videos were posted to Facebook by Ruth demonstrating his deed. Shortly after posting the videos, Ruth was arrested, and now he faces 4 counts of criminal tampering.
That always cracks me up that people post their stuff to Facebook and YouTube and then get arrested. It cracks me up every time.
I guess he thought he was doing something noble because it was in protest to the government collecting surveillance on our citizens. But I don't know if it's ingenious or I guess mission accomplished.
And that dumb story of the week wraps up this week's discussion. Now coming up, we have our interview with TrapX CEO Greg Enriquez. And we talk about deception technologies, what they are, and how enterprises can use them to help fend off attackers. I thought we'd kick this off at a pretty high level because I'm fairly ignorant on what deception technologies are. So wondering if you could start us off with just what is deception technology?
Deception technology is a very old technology. It's in fact 4,000 years old if you go back to Sun Tzu. So it really is, in the world of information security, the idea of putting fake assets out in your network right next to your production assets. So in essence, what you're doing is on your LAN, you're putting Windows, Linux, workstation servers out there that emulate your production systems. And in fact, with TrapX, you can put deception technology in your network, have it use IP addresses on your network, and name it just like your production assets. So let's say you're a retailer. You have cash registers on your IT system. You put fake cash registers out there. They're emulations of your production systems, and they're put out there with the technology from TrapX. So an attacker is inside your network and looking to identify an asset to go after, to steal information, they will touch a fake asset during their process. It's really an old technology. In the battlefields, they put fake cannons. In the days of knights and kings, they had fake assets out there to fool the attacker. In essence, what we've done is automated the process in information technology to put fake assets on your network right next to your production systems to fool the attackers, delay the attack, and gather information about the attack. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the classic example that at least I understand, and maybe other listeners will, is the honeypot. You know, we hear about researchers using these tools to fool cyber attackers with these fake targets and then analyze, various aspects of cybercrime. So, is that basically the essence? Or, not to get too technical, but is there other things involved that happen? Or is it basically just kind of the honeypot example?
Actually, honeypot technology is a good example. It's been around since the 90s, the late 90s, with the HoneyNet project. And honeypots or honeynets have been something IT security professionals have wanted to use in their environment for years, but have always run into challenges. And the challenges with honeypots or honeynets are you have to build them, and you have to have very smart people to build them. You have to start from scratch or with open source and build it yourself. Once you build it, you have to manage it and maintain it. And often you're using live operating systems to do that. They may be patched or updated by Microsoft or other vendors. So they are somewhat cumbersome. Although they're attractive and they're useful, they have their disadvantages. The new breed of deception technology we have today, we in fact use an emulation of TrapX. There are others that use full operating systems. Our approach is to use an emulation because it's lightweight. You don't have to patch it or update it. You can fully control it. And when you have a high interaction deception like ours, you're able to fool the attacker with that emulation and draw them in. So it is not yesterday's honeypot. It's today's deception technology, and it takes over where honeypots left off and gives you new advantages and takes away the problems with old honeypot technology.
Yeah, I was wondering sort of how you guys' company, TrapX, how do you guys fit into this market? I guess I'm pretty ignorant on what's out there. Are there a lot of companies doing this? Are there different approaches? And how do you guys fit in there?
Well, deception is a growth area right now. It is part of a layered defense, or if you look at the defense in depth strategy, I would always tell every security team to have multiple layers of defense. They should have a firewall. They should have antivirus. They should have advanced threat detection techniques. Deception clearly fills the gaps. It's there for when they breach the perimeter or they get inside your network, they're moving laterally or east-west in your network. Deception technology will identify them where other technologies don't. It is clearly an easy-to-use, somewhat of a set-and-forget technology. If you have a less sophisticated or a small security team, it's a great advanced threat technology to give you a quick alert. What security teams don't want today is more information and more alerts. They want higher fidelity alerts. They want fewer alerts that they know they have to respond to versus thousands of alerts which they have to sift through and determine which ones to respond to. So the way TrapX fits in is we have a lightweight emulation. It's a medium to high interaction deception. It's quickly deployed into your environment. It's passive, meaning it doesn't take over the endpoint or demand an egress point. It fits into your network fairly passively, but gives you rapid alerts of activity that let's call it nefarious activity that may be going on inside your network. The whole idea is to get from alert to fix in less than 10 minutes. And what TrapX does is give you an automated tool to do that, along with forensic information once you identify an attacker in your network.
You mentioned that it's a good tool for small security teams. I guess my perception is that it'd be something that a lot of large enterprises would be using. For example, in the Gartner report, it said that by 2018, 10% of enterprises will be using deception tools and tactics and actively participate in deception operations against attackers. So it seems like it's a pretty new and emerging technology. So obviously you guys think there's big market in the future, but I'm wondering who's that market today? What kind of companies are you targeting? Who's using it?
Sure. You asked about TrapX. We've been in business since 2011. We have grabbed an early position in deception technology. We have a large number of customers already implementing our technology, and they range from small 1 to 2 security team or no security team, just an operations team in financial services, healthcare, manufacturing, public sector, to large multi-location enterprises. We have one hospital that's got 18 hospitals deployed. We have another manufacturing enterprise that's got dozens of locations deployed. So the beauty of deception technology is you can add it to your current security stack because we've designed TrapX to operate in the ecosystem of security products, and we interoperate with other products. So it gives you that additional visibility for east-west traffic inside your network. However, if you're a small organization and you can't afford to deploy sandbox technology on every egress point, or you can't afford to deploy endpoint technology and manage it, you can deploy a deception technology very simply across your VLAN. You can set it, and it will give you a very high fidelity alert for advanced attackers, and it will complement the other entry-level security tools that you have in place. So firewall, check. Antivirus, check. Deception technology gives you defensive deception operations and early alerts for the most advanced attackers.
Obviously, you guys probably can't talk about specific customers, but just wondering if you could share an example or two of customers that you have and how this deception technology works to help fend off attackers.
Sure. I mentioned before healthcare, and healthcare has been under attack recently. I've been doing cyber for quite a while, and 5 years ago, healthcare was not as worried about this situation. But as we've mentioned in previous reports, the value of healthcare personal information has gone up significantly. In fact, studies say that the value on the black market of healthcare PII, or personally identifiable information, is 20 times that of credit card information. So we've seen these large healthcare attacks. So what's happened is we had a customer in healthcare who deployed our deception technology. They deployed it with the intent of protecting their business systems. So, there's nurses stations, there are administrative stations, there's Windows workstations that operate the business of healthcare and are there to protect both financial and personal information for their patients, and also business information and other maybe even technical information. What we found is once we deployed on a VLAN, we were on the VLAN with the nurses, and also there were medical devices on the VLAN. There were PACS devices, blood gas analyzers, MRI devices. Typically in a healthcare environment, the security team is very good at securing the administrative systems, or at least that's their primary function. They also have to work in cooperation with manufacturers like a McKesson or others for the medical devices. Maybe they have less opportunity to put security tools or monitor or check those medical devices. And what we found is attackers were going in, they were camping out on Windows systems on medical devices like blood gas analyzers. They were hanging out there and then coming out and attacking administrative systems. Well, with a technology like deception, you're passively on the network. You don't have to be on the production system. So medical devices are very sensitive. They don't want you to change them or put software on them. But we're right there next to them, and the attackers touch us. So we identified significant amount of malware, remote access Trojans and other kinds of malware on those medical devices in that particular hospital.
My final question is, the report also said that deception as an automated response mechanism represents a sea change in the capability of the future of IT security. So obviously, Gartner seems to think that this is a big growing field. So just wondering if, say, your enterprise or your business out there listening and you're interested in exploring this approach, is there anything in particular that they should be aware of or be taking action on?
Well, I think any enterprise listening ought to look at their offensive approach to security. What are they doing to lean in and to hunt for attackers on their network? We all don't want to just sit back and wait to be attacked. We want to have an active defense. We want to scan our environment for possible intrusions. We always want to keep up to date on vulnerability assessments and pen testing and use all the current security tools. But deception technology allows you, with a low amount of friction, to put traps in your network or decoys so that you can shake out attackers who may be on your network and get the earliest amount of notification that you need to remediate. So I would tell them to determine how defensive operations, or what we call defensive deception operations, can fit into their environment, how to operationalize it. The cost to add deception to your current security stack should be relatively marginal compared to the benefit you'll see from it. It gives you more ears and eyes. It gives you a trap. It's like you're at the bank and you do a couple of things. You set a trap for the bad guy outside. You put in 2 or 3 vaults so they don't know which one to attack. You're creating a more difficult environment for the attacker to get to your most valuable information. But you still have to do all the other good things, or what I call good hygiene. Update and patch your systems, have good policies and practices, segment your network, do all those things and put deception in your process.
That's all the questions that I have, unless there's anything else you wanted to touch on.
No, that'd be great. Thanks for the time, Jeff. I appreciate the conversation.
And that will do it for this week's Cybercrime and Business podcast. As always, you can follow us on iTunes, YouTube, and all the major podcasting sites. And for more information, check out surfwatchlabs.com.